may be aware, we have almost 100 community events here in London. And for the first year event, that's amazing that that many different organizations and projects and people threw together meetups and things like that. But the very first community event that happened was in Parliament. It was at the House of Lords. You hosted that for us. We had probably several dozen folks from the local area and then several dozen that had flown in for it, specific to kind of come spend time. Today, you and I are going to talk about the future of NFTs in governance and politics. Before we get started, can you please tell everyone a bit about yourself and what you do as the Baron of Shoreditch in Parliament and beyond?
Yeah, I've a bit of a crazy journey. Started off in tech consulting, so I was actually around just about in 1990. I first started my first post-university job at McKinsey doing technology in 1999. So this feels very familiar, but it's sort of 2 generations of tech ago. And then I worked in social entrepreneurship, in venture capital, was then asked by several prime ministers ago to enter the House of Lords, where I've become a legislator, and now I sit on various boards. I sit on a select committee for technology, so a lot of the UK's sort of policy around tech and science I have some input into. And have loads of other projects. A lot of what I do is around how do we change the world, especially using tech and in a smart way.
You're passionate about social entrepreneurship. I know that throughout the week you've asked me, okay, who can I talk to that's involved in different disciplines? Rather than me reiterate, can you share a bit about who are the folks that you're specifically interested in connecting with, either that are here or that see our talk in a week or in a year through the internet? Internet, we see you. We know you're there in the future. Welcome to the party. Who do you want to reach out to? Who do you want to reach out to you specifically?
Well, it's interesting listening to the previous panel talking about what next after Bitcoin, and it's been great to be part of this week and see how through NFTs we're seeing the power of this decentralized movement in art and in different spheres. I'm really interested in why are we here? How can we make this world a better place? In education, climate especially. I'm doing a lot of work on climate, which we'll talk about in a minute. So how do we harness this technology to actually change the physical world as well as the virtual world, improve people's lives? And there's a lot we can do to do that. A lot of value we can create, not just for ourselves, through the increased capital value of our wallets, but actually how can we actually... So the other day I had a very interesting conversation with some people who just came out of UBS talking about selling outcomes, which are essentially selling NFTs that represent helping a child or 1 ton of carbon or whatever. And what if you could one day stand on a ticket to get elected and say, I'm going to help 1 million kids get a better education, and then instead of coming into that government and trying to find your people to do all of that, you just go, okay, find on the market where they're selling the NFT, which will help that 1 million children. In fact, where 1 million children have been helped, you would buy those as a government, and then the money would get released for the very people who achieved that to do more, for example, right? It's got a retrospective social outcomes, I guess, NFT. I think I've coined that term for the first term now. But that's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in. I'm doing a lot of work on algae. How do we get to net zero, 50 gigatons with one thing, which in the last billion years, twice was algae, when the world got hot twice. And I found this out watching a Christmas lecture with my kids. And so 2 years later, we're working on this decentralized network to tokenize sequestering algae grown all around the world into char or other carbon-based products to get to 50 gigatons. And really starting to look at how can we harness the Bitcoin dynamic. Every Bitcoin, I'm actually glad the panel has just left the room. Every Bitcoin uses the energy of one country, one small country, one medium-sized country to create. What if we had a network using things like algae, that every time you created tokens, you created the equivalent of one country's carbon sequestration, billions of tons of carbon, just to make that. I'm talking to scientists in Canada about the potential to use algae to do calculations, traveling salesman calculations, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, to replicate the best thing about Bitcoin, which isn't the fact that it makes money, but the fact that it's very hard to hack, because you would need half the world's Bitcoin servers to hack it, right? But what if we did something where you need half the world's bioreactors to sequester the carbon to solve the problem? that won the prize that led to the next green version of Bitcoin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we could harness the power of the chains that are out there and make them more than net zero, make them actually do the job for us, just suck carbon out of the air, and loads of other stuff too.
I want to talk a bit about governance and politics, and here's how I'll frame it for all of us so that we are on the same page in terms of definition. Let's frame politics as the effort to attain and retain power, and let's define governance as what a politician does with that power. So can we talk a bit about how do NFTs, smart contracts, play a role first in the role of governance? What a politician in a government will do, and how will they use this automation tool to govern better and to serve their constituents and their people better? Let's first talk about governance, please.
Yeah, there's a lot to go through here, and I'm conscious there's not much time. I first want to just slightly challenge the assumption, which might put me in the minority at this conference, that there is a kind of world of politics and elites, and then there's the rest of us who eventually go onto the chains and decentralize the world. That is a truth, and the last few years that rings true since 2008. But actually, if you think about the origins of politics, the original politics, it was doing what you're doing here, taking power from the elites and putting it into the hands of the citizens of, say, Athens, right? The ecclesia is called back in the day. You can look it up. So though we think we're being very revolutionary and we're taking power from elites, I think this Web 3 is just part of a process which Web 2 and Web 1 and Web 0 started, which is slowly taking power away from one person, one emperor, or one tribal village leader, and getting it out into the hands of people. And so if you think about it as an evolution rather than revolution, revolutions are wonderful, but certainly in politics, in 1850, every country in Europe, apart from this one, had a revolution. They all failed. They all switched back to the old status quo within a few decades. And then somebody invented the idea of realpolitik, which is if you're going to get this thing to stick, you've got to get the army and the royalty on your side, which is what they started to do. And then these changes started to stick, sometimes with more blood than less. So how can we take the idea of blockchain, NFTs, and transform what we see today, the broken system we have today? Well, the first thing I think is we've got to change the law. What I really worry about NFTs is they're not actually legal devices. So there's been a lot of lawyers at this conference, and wonderful. I want all laws in the world to become NFTs. And every NFT, or I prefer to call them computable contracts, would actually have legal value, as in really be legal things, rather than I tell you it's legal, and then you come on my server, and then I cut you off from my server, and you then legally can't force me to give you the thing that's on my server, which I think is what most NFTs are still today in law, right? Now, if we made every law a digital asset, then we can do interesting things with the laws. We can actually link the laws together and work out, do they actually work together as a process, as a software engineering process, for example. And then we can go, well, these laws don't work because they're buggy. Or we should get rid of these laws because they're clogging up the system. One of the things I've said to my colleagues at the House of Lords, which hasn't really yet had much traction, is we should have a TripAdvisor for law. We should get the citizens to literally rate the laws and say which ones are useless. In fact, get the judges to rate the laws, and the judges tell me already, a third of the laws we make every year they don't use. I'm sure this is true in your country too. So there's a lot we can do to take the idea of NFTs and start to infect the real world to improve things in the real world in law. Secondly, we can change the institutions themselves. Most people in this room don't know what Parliament is like. Most kids in this country don't know what Parliament. Why don't we have metaverses where you can go and be trained up in how Parliament works, right? And then why don't the kids hack the way Parliament works and make it better, right?
Good.
And make it more accessible to people.
I really love it.
Do you just want your kids to learn about Bitcoin and crypto and Web3, but not change those places? And not just Parliament, but boardrooms. Not just boardrooms, but big tech, right? How can we use technology like swarm technologies to make decentralized decisions together? I'll say these words, teal and swarmocracies, and there are various technologies out there. We could be using them there in boardrooms. I'm working with startups that can do A/B testing on who's missing in the room, not just whether they're black or Chinese, but like the life background of the experience of somebody that's missing from the boardroom that if you did the A/B test would make Google more money. Not just on how you look, but on your actual ability to make a decision. Can we use those to find the super forecasters? And then use the blockchain NFTs to track the people who are making the prediction on the right judgments every single time. That means we could make dustbin men in the north of England or housewives in Atlanta politicians because they get the decision right 100 times in a row. Wouldn't you like politicians that did that instead of ones that just look good or shouted loud? So how we choose our politicians and how we form our institutions, how we simulate and red team, these are all things that this technology can enable. And finally, how we make decisions together can really change. And we talk a lot about DAOs at the moment, but I think there's much more we can do to just focus on making better. I call it democracy 3.0. Not I can vote because I have land and money, or I can vote because I'm above 18. Forget about who we're putting in charge. Focus on whoever's in charge, how do we help them make better decisions?
That's good.
That's, to me, the most important thing. And how does that link to NFTs? Well, this needs to be a dialogue. And I think the final thing I'll say is the human brain has a part of it that's very top-down. It's called the amygdala. Your fight and flight response, when you're in danger, your body kind of tenses up and you start to fight. And that's a very top-down kind of way of governing, right?
Right.
Follow me or I'll kill you. That's basically how that system works. But then we have another system, the prefrontal cortex, which is very rational. And then we have the gut. And all these systems work together. They actually build on top of each other. What we're building is kind of somewhere between the prefrontal cortex or the gut for governance. But you still need the other bits, right? If Putin was to invade this country, I don't know how Bitcoin or NFTs would help you right now. You would need missiles, and maybe you can hack the drones, right? So you need the things that already came before, but you enhance and improve them, and eventually we bring them on side. And then the real question is, who runs the whole thing? Not runs your bit or who runs the old bit, but how do we fuse the lot together so we run it better together?
What can we do as an event, and what can we do as an environment, a community? It's this event, it's all the other events that collaborate. What can we do to welcome you and your peers that are global governors in different respects? How can we open the door for you and your peers to come here and to participate in the conversation? Because a lot of what you shared today so passionately, thank you for being so hard on sleeve today for us, has not been heard. A lot of what you shared today has not yet been spoken and recorded in this context. So how can we do better to be more welcoming? Please tell us.
I think this is a very scary crowd for your average politician or corporate executive, because you're talking about, what you talk about sounds anarchic. There's a lot of this fashion and all these things that feel, for those people, very much out of their world, right? They feel like they're really busy running, making sure the world doesn't collapse and banks. But they have real problems they cannot solve, right? So in this country, we can't solve the problem of growth, the cost of mortgages. We can't solve our education, healthcare system. If you had ideas using this technology to solve those problems, and I think you do, I think most people in this room could solve those problems in their sleep 10 times better than we would conventional methods outside, right? But sometimes it just feels like you just want to talk about fashion and making more money and metaverses, which is fine. I use all of those things. But actually, I think there are people out there who are struggling with the cost of living, and you can make a difference to their lives without burning the entire energy of a country while you do it each time. I think if you focused a bit of your energy, I'm talking to a lot of the foundations that were created with different chains launching. First of all, to get them to net zero and beyond, and then get them to get to 50 gigatons. But also, I think a lot of them could have solutions or foster solutions for health and education. You guys could be the next social reformers. Instead of waiting for the world to collapse, and then you get to run the virtual world after the world has collapsed, you could save the current world that we live in with the technology you have, which is, by the way, what people did 100 years ago and 200 years ago and 500 years ago. That's why we still live in a world that exists today. It's because social reformers in their day recognized the system was breaking and they fixed it using the technology that they had.
Can we please give Lord Atway a hand? Thank you so much, Matt.